How's it going, folks? I'm Duz with DuzFit, and it's been a couple years since Polar launched their original Grit X sports watch, which took a lot of the technology that was found on their Vantage series line of multi-sport watches and put it into a lot more rugged case that was clearly aimed at the outdoor adventure crowd. And today, Polar's launching the Grit X Pro, which has all the features found on the original Grit X, as well as the features found on the Vantage V2, but also adds some new routing and navigation features that are definitely going to be useful for those of you adventuring outdoors. So we're just going to go ahead and get straight into this review. So for the hardware, they've updated the look and feel a bit with some new accents around the stainless steel bezel, which help differentiate it from the original. And they've also added what I think is a very needed feature when it comes to a watch that's intended for all those rough outdoor activities. And that's a sapphire glass lens, which I'm particularly happy to see. And this is also supposed to have military grade durability. The Grit X Pro comes in 3 different color options, and this is the black DLC version that I have in front of me today. And there's also a Grit X Pro Titan, which costs $100 more, which uses titanium in the construction to make it 12% lighter. And the titanium version also comes with a leather wristband in addition to this fluoroelastomer, or I think what they call an FKM wristband, which is basically like a rubbery silicone-like wristband. It's a good wristband. And then for weight, the Grit X Pro comes in around 77.5 grams, at least on my scale, which is actually a bit heavier than the original Grit X. And then the Grit X Pro Titan has an advertised weight of around 73 grams, so not exactly a massive difference in terms of weight savings with that titanium version. The Grit X Pro also uses the same transflective type display that looks great outdoors in direct sunlight, but when you're indoors, it's a bit more challenging to see, but it does have a backlight that you can enable. But what is super nice is that they also added some backlight display options, so you can actually now adjust your backlight brightness settings. So that's the new hardware, but now let's talk about the new software features. So let's first start out with 2 new watch face dashboards, which you can kind of think about as little widgets that you can access from the watch face without having to start an actual activity. So the first new dashboard shows the sunrise, sunset, and twilight times and indicates this with a colored ring around the watch face. And I think this is a pretty cool looking dashboard. So when you click into this dashboard, it just shows the same information, but just a little bit larger. And then the other new watch face is a location-based watch face that shows your current altitude, compass, as well as orientation. And then when you click into this dashboard, it displays an elevation graph of your elevation over the last 6 hours, your last node coordinates, as well as a bigger compass. And I have to say that those 2 new dashboards are pretty nice, and I especially like that new sunrise and sunset one, especially around this time of year where daylight's getting shorter and shorter. It's just nice to have that information right on the watch face. Oh, and really quick before I forget, if you're finding the information in this video useful, do me a favor and just hit that like button down below. It's a small little thing that you can do to help this video and the channel out quite a bit, and I appreciate it. Okay, so now onto the new routing and navigation features, and there's actually quite a bit to cover here. So first up with navigation, there's a route selection page within the activity settings where you can choose from a list of your preloaded routes like from Komoot. And when you click into one of these routes, it'll show the distance, a map of the route, an elevation graph of the route. And what's nice is that you can also access the fuel-wise, nutrition, and drink reminders directly from the screen, which I find to be a lot more convenient. And then when you choose the route, you can either start the route at the actual start point or you can start mid-route. Now, during your activity, when you've chosen a route, you can zoom in and out of your route. You can end the route if you'd like, but you can also reverse the route, which is basically reverses your loaded predefined route. And they also have a couple ways to get you back to your start location if you're just done and want to get back home, where the first option is a beeline option, which, as you can imagine, is just the shortest distance possible back to your start location, which is essentially a straight line. And the other is the ability to go back via the same route that you took, or basically backtracking your actual route, whether or not you loaded in a route in the first place. Going back along the same route definitely makes a lot of sense, but the beeline option is a little bit interesting considering the fact that the Grit X Pro does not have full-blown mapping. So beeline just kind of points you in the general direction of where you need to go, and you kind of have to figure out which trails or streets will get you back to your start location. And another new feature when you load in a route is a new data page that shows you an elevation profile of your route, and this is definitely super handy where it shows your current grade, current altitude, the amount of ascent and descent that you've covered, as well as the ascent and descent that remains. And if you do have a route with turn-by-turn navigation like from Komoot, it'll overlay and still prompt you for those turns at the top of the screen. And what's cool is that this elevation graph data page is also available if you don't even load in a route at all, where it'll show your elevation graph over the course of your activity along with the current grade, current altitude, as well as the total ascent and descent that you've already covered. So those are all the new routing and navigation features on the Grit X Pro, but what is nice is that if you do own a Vantage V2, they will be porting those features to your watch via a firmware update, I believe around October 20th. So it's kind of nice that you can have those navigation and routing features on a more rugged watch like the Grit X Pro or a more svelte watch like the Vantage V2. But along with those new routing and navigation features in the Grid X Pro, the Grid X Pro also does get some features that were found on the Vantage V2 as well as the Vantage M2. And the first of which is the Grid X Pros get heart rate broadcasting, which allows you to broadcast your heart rate to other devices and apps, like if you want to broadcast your heart rate to Zwift. It also comes with music controls to control the music playing on your phone, but just note it does not have any onboard music storage or playback. It comes with Recovery Pro, which comes on the Vantage V2. And then it also comes with the entire suite of fitness tests, like with the running test, the cycling test, the leg recovery test, as well as the orthostatic test, again, found on the Vantage V2. And I'll have a link down in the description below where I'll have the details about all those fitness tests that I did already in the Vantage V2 in-depth review. And then in terms of sensors, the Grid X Pro uses the same GPS chipset as the original Grid X. And in terms of GPS performance, I'd say it's decent, where for the most part, it's in line with other test devices. But I did notice on some corners that it had a tendency to swoop around just a little bit. Nothing too bad by any means, but it was definitely noticeable. And this was for both high speeds while biking as well as slower speeds while running. The Grid X Pro has the same Precision Prime heart rate sensor as the original Grid X, and I wasn't necessarily ever super impressed with the heart rate sensor on the original Grid X, and I'd probably have to say the same thing about the Grid X Pro, where it's just not quite as accurate as I'd like it to be. Like on this bike ride, it was just kind of jittery throughout the entire ride, and then on some occasions it had some major dips like at the end. And then for running, about the same deal, but even less accurate, where on this run, it came out quite a bit short. And this always surprises me, especially considering Polar makes the phenomenally accurate VeritySense optical arm heart rate sensor, as well as their very accurate chest heart rate sensors. But the Grid X Pro will be able to collect running power from the wrist itself. It'll also get Polar's sleep tracking, which I find to be pretty accurate. And it'll also get Polar's FitSpark training guidance, which gives you workout suggestions based on your training history. And then for battery life, that's going to be the same as the original Grid X, where the Grid X Pro will get up to about 40 hours of standard GPS battery life with heart rate recording, and that's pretty decent. And then about 7 days as just like a regular watch. And then you can get up to about 100 hours of GPS recording time if you enable some of the battery saver settings. So that's everything that you do get with the Grid X Pro, but let's talk about some of the things that you don't get with the Grid X Pro. So I already mentioned that you won't get full-blown maps, and you also won't get music storage or playback. But I do have to mention that although the Grid X Pro can pair to Bluetooth external sensors, it can't pair to ANT+ sensors. And this can be a big issue for cyclists, especially if you're training indoors when your bike trainer only has one Bluetooth connection. So what happens when you're training indoors is that you'll be pairing your bike trainer to your, let's say, iPad or Apple TV via the one Bluetooth connection. At that point, your watch won't actually be able to collect the power data that's being transmitted from your trainer because that one Bluetooth connection is already used up. However, your bike trainer will likely be transmitting ANT+, which the Grid X Pro won't be able to pick up. And the other issue is with Polar's own cycling test, where if you do have a bike trainer that only has that one Bluetooth connection, you actually won't be able to perform the cycling test with just your Grid X Pro. You'll actually have to have another device that's able to control the resistance on your trainer via ANT+, so your watch can actually collect the power data. And I doubt Polar will ever shift in the stance of not including ANT+ on their watches, but it just seems confusing to me considering that Polar does transmit ANT+ with their VeritySense optical arm heart rate sensors as well as their chest heart rate monitors. But just be aware of this limitation if you're a cyclist. Anyhow, now let's talk about price. So the Grid X Pro comes in at $500, and then the Grid X Pro Titan comes in at $600. The original Grid X is $430, so for $70 more, you get a sapphire glass lens, and for me, that's actually worth it. But for $500 for the feature set, that's maybe a little bit harder to sell, but for durability, I do think this is a pretty good option. Overall, I like this new update with the Grid X Pro, especially with the new routing and navigation features and the sapphire glass lens, although I would have maybe liked to see a larger display, ditching some of the bezel that surrounds it, as well as some improvements to the heart rate sensor. But for the outdoor adventure crowd, I think this is going to be a pretty interesting option. Anyhow, if you find the information in this video useful, make sure to hit that like button down below, and also subscribe to the channel because I've got a ton of videos lined up that'll be dropping soon that I think you're going to want to check out. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.